Is this going to be what dominates conversation?
Well, in many ways it should be, because it is loss of life and a huge potential risk of blowing into a major war or even a regional war. But no, I don't think this is going to be the dominant theme at UNGA this week. I think the U.S. presidential election is still the elephant in every single room. And that's because the difference between a Harris administration or a Trump administration is not only important on tax rates and tariff policy, but on almost everything else. So it's alliances, it's geostrategic issues, it's the war in Ukraine, it's everything. So that's not to say that Israel-Lebanon's not going to be a topic, but I don't think there's going to be anything that comes close to the U.S. election.
Well, out of all of those you mentioned, is tariff the scariest word in New York this week?
It's pretty damn close.
Yeah.
I think there is a major risk that some governments are starting to cotton on to, that if Trump were to do even some of what he has said he will do, whether it is the 20% across-the-board tariff or the tariffs on China or any subset thereof, that this has the risk of spiraling into a global trade war, because you've got tit for tat for tit for tat. And that actually poses, and I'm not predicting this, but it's a risk of really serious downside global recession-style risks. And you've got to take that pretty seriously.
Well, he's talking about fresh tariffs today. He is suggesting now John Deere, if they move production to Mexico, will face a 200% tariff on everything they want to sell in the United States. He's floated 200% tariffs on, as well, on EVs coming into the country. It does seem like the numbers might be getting higher and higher.
Yeah.
And so we consider, especially when it comes to tariffs on China, if that would mean an actual complete decoupling of these economies, knowing the current administration has been very careful not even really to say decouple at all, but diversify, et cetera. But is that the moment we would be brought to if the kind of figures he's talking about become reality?
Well, look, if Trump were to go down the route of 60% tariffs, I'm using 60% because that's the figure that he apparently has used. I don't think that that just suddenly means, okay, everything's more expensive, so let's find another way to produce it somewhere else, so you have that decoupling. I think that creates the dynamic I described before, which is you really get into a geopolitical, geoeconomic downward cycle in which the consequences could be fairly sudden and fairly dramatic. I don't think that that would stay put. So I don't think you're going to see Donald Trump, who has decided in his belief of how tariffs work, that they are costless. So therefore, I hadn't heard the 200%. But sure, why not 300%? Why not 400%? In other words, if he's going down the route in which tariffs are the silver bullet to everything that ails us, then escalating them for 10% to 20%, 100% to 200% becomes this.
He also says the revenue they create will offset all of the taxes.
But that's what I mean. So if that becomes the go-to, then I don't think you get to the point where you have this decoupled world. I think you have a potential for a bigger global crisis that happens before you get there. And then what happens on the back of that, sort of determines where you go from there.
The market seems to think there's something elusive about Kamala Harris, that there are uncertainties that they want to hear more about, that she's less of a sure thing than Donald Trump. Well, we talk about Trump's uncertainties at UNGA. What's the world community concerned about when it comes to Kamala Harris? What do they want to know?
I'm going to push back on that. I don't think the UNGA universe cares as much about specific policies as they do predictability and stability and continuity.
Does her affiliation with this administration and the role she plays as vice president help?
Absolutely.
On that front?
So the expectation is that alliances remain predictable, that the multilateral system, for what it's worth, remains in place, that NATO remains something the U.S. stands behind. Go down the list. They are perfectly happy to say, we'll hear about policies later, as long as the basic fundamentals of the world order are something that is predictable. Now, there are some that don't like the current world order, so they would rather see a Trump win rather than a Harris one.
Okay.
But certainly the alliances and the institutions that we've all grown up expecting to be in place would most likely stay in place, and that's probably a good thing for stability going into and coming out of UNGA.
Do bodies like the United Nations still hold up that world order? Are they still effective in doing so? With
diminishing effectiveness. I think over time you've seen the multilateral world, which used to be manifest by the UN at the top, has devolved into the G20, And then the G20 has become much less effective and is sort of broken down into the G7 and the BRICS, and then a bunch of other what I call mini-laterals, so the Quad and others, where these alliances are shifting, and you have people or countries that are in multiple groups. Some of them are competing, but the rising above it all at the top, the UN that I grew up with, whether it was effective or not, we can make questions, but at least it was there as the pinnacle of that global system. Mm-hmm. I think is probably no longer the case. I think UNGA, and I hate to say this, is more effective for its sideline meetings than it is for the actual official meetings themselves.
Makes a lot of sense. Remember when Donald Trump was laughed at in front of the General Assembly in 2018? Would that happen again if he spoke now? Does that inform the way the UN looks at him now?
Well, he wouldn't speak now as a non-sitting
no, of course. But if that were to happen again, if he were reelected
next year, I don't think he would be laughed at because I think there's a greater sense of the authority of the President of the United States to do some unilateral things that affect countries and the world order. So I don't think it's a laughing matter. I think it's much more of a where do we go from here?